One night about a week after Sheriff Jones's visit, as I sat trying to read The House of the Seven Gables, Arlette crept up behind me, reached around the side of my head, and tapped the bridge of my nose with one cold, wet finger. I dropped the book on the braided sitting room rug, screamed, and leapt to my feet. When I did, the cold fingertip ran down to the corner of my mouth. Then it touched me again, on top of my head, where the hair was getting thin. This time I laughed, a shaky, angry laugh, and bent to pick up my book. As I did, the finger tapped a third time, this one on the nape of the neck, as if my dead wife were saying, "Have I got your attention yet, Wilf?" I stepped away, so the fourth tap wouldn't be in the eye, and looked up. The ceiling overhead was discolored and dripping. The plaster hadn't started to bulge yet, but if the rain continued, it would. It might even dissolve and come down in chunks. The leak was above my special reading place. Of course it was. The rest of the ceiling looked fine, at least so far. I thought of Stoppenhauser saying, "Do you want to tell me there aren't improvements you could make?" A roof to fix? And that sly look. As if he had known. As if he and Arlette were in on it together. Don't be getting such things in your head, I told myself. Bad enough that you keep thinking of her, down there. Have the worms gotten her eyes yet, I wonder? Have the bugs eaten away her sharp tongue, or at least blunted it? I went to the table in the far corner of the room, got the bottle that stood there, and poured myself a good-sized hooker of brown whiskey. My hand trembled, but only a little. I downed it in 2 swallows. I knew it would be a bad business to turn such drinking into a habit, but it's not every night that a man feels his dead wife tap him on the nose. And the hooch made me feel better. More in control of myself. I didn't need to take on a $750 mortgage to fix my roof, I could patch it with scrap lumber when the rain stopped. But it would be an ugly fix, would make the place look like what my mother would have called trash poor. Nor was that the point. Fixing a leak would take only a day or 2. I needed work that would keep me through the winter. Hard labor would drive out thoughts of Arlette on her dirt throne, Arlette in her burlap snood. I needed home improvement projects that would send me to bed so tired that I'd sleep right through, and not lie there listening to the rain and wondering if Henry was out in it, maybe coughing from the grip. Sometimes work is the only thing, the only answer. The next day I drove to town in my truck and did what I never would have thought of doing if I hadn't needed to borrow $35. I took out a mortgage for $750. In the end, we are all caught in devices of our own making. I believe that. In the end, we are all caught. In Omaha that same week, a young man wearing a plainsman's hat walked into a pawnshop on Dodge Street and bought a nickel-plated .32 caliber pistol. He paid with $5 that had no doubt been handed to him, under duress, by a half-blind old woman who did business beneath the sign of the Blue Bonnet Girl. The next day, a young man wearing a flat cap on his head and a red bandana over his mouth and nose walked into the Omaha branch of the First Agricultural Bank, pointed a gun at a pretty young teller named Rhoda Penmark, and demanded all the money in her drawer. She passed over about $200, mostly in ones and fives, the grimy kind farmers carry rolled up in the pockets of their bib overalls. As he left, stuffing the money into his pants with one hand, clearly nervous, he dropped several bills on the floor. The portly guard, a retired policeman, said, "Son, you don't want to do this." The young man fired his .32 into the air. Several people screamed. "I don't want to shoot you, either," the young man said from behind his bandana, "but I will if I have to." "Fall back against that post, sir, and stay there if you know what's good for you." "I've got a friend outside watching the door." The young man ran out, already stripping the bandana from his face. The guard waited for a minute or so, then went out with his hands raised. He had no sidearm, just in case there really was a friend. There wasn't, of course. Hank James had no friends in Omaha except for the one with his baby growing in her belly. I took $200 of my mortgage money in cash and left the rest in Mr. Stoppenhauser's bank. I went shopping at the hardware, the lumber yard, and the grocery store where Henry might have gotten a letter from his mother. If she were still alive to write one. I drove out of town in a drizzle that had turned to slashing rain by the time I got home. I unloaded my newly purchased lumber and shingles, did the feeding and milking, then put away my groceries, mostly dry goods and staples that were running low without Arlette to ride herd on the kitchen. With that chore done, I put water on the wood stove to heat for a bath and stripped off my damp clothes. I pulled the wad of money out of the right front pocket of my crumpled biballs, counted it, and saw I still had just shy of $160.